In recent months, something strange has been happening in the technology industry. First came patent leaks, then closed presentations without the press, then strange prototypes that appear in photos for only a few seconds and disappear. And now, there are more and more coincidences that can no longer be ignored. Apple, Samsung, Xiaomi, and other companies have simultaneously begun working on the same idea: next-generation transparent devices. Not exhibition concepts or designer fantasies, but real products that may come out in the coming years, with the first prototypes potentially appearing as early as 2026. Sources connected to supply chains in China and South Korea speak of prototypes of transparent iPad-like tablets, new types of OLED and micro-LED panels, and glass that is simultaneously a screen, an interface, and part of a computing system. Apple is reportedly testing transparent panels for iPad and future Mac devices, where the boundary between the screen and reality disappears. Samsung is experimenting with fully transparent frameless displays that turn a tablet into a window into the digital world. And Xiaomi, as always, wants to go further by combining transparent screens, AI, and projection interfaces into a single device. And if such technologies once seemed like a distant future, today everything points to the beginning of a new race. A race not for megapixels and gigahertz, but for the very shape of technology, for how tablets, smartphones, and computers will look in 1, 2, or 3 years. Transparent devices are not just design, they are a new way of interacting with information, a new level of augmented reality, a new step toward a world where screens disappear and technology becomes part of the space around us. 2026 may become the moment when we first see not just another upgrade, but a change of era. And today we will examine all the rumors, insider reports, and hidden signals indicating that the largest technology corporations have already begun this race, a race capable of changing how we see, use, and understand technology. When Apple officially introduced a new visual interface theme called Liquid Glass, most viewers perceived it as just another cosmetic update. Beautiful, premium, impressive, but at first glance nothing more than a visual evolution of familiar iOS and iPadOS. However, behind this announcement lies a much deeper and potentially revolutionary step that may signal the beginning of an entirely new stage in the development of the entire Apple ecosystem. Liquid glass is not just a style, not just transparent panels, shimmering effects, and glass-like layers. It is a foundation, an interface philosophy that for the first time in many years does not simply improve the user experience, but opens the door to a physical rethinking of the devices themselves. From this moment, Apple gains the technological and design legitimacy to take the next logical yet extremely risky step, to create the first truly transparent personal device, and that device could be the next generation iPad. A transparent iPad sounds like fantasy, a YouTube concept, or a designer render from Twitter. But if you carefully examine Apple's strategy, its patents, internal team changes, and the innovation stagnation the company has effectively been stuck in for recent years, it becomes clear: Apple needs a shock, and liquid glass may be the first signal of a much larger revolution. Over the past few years, Apple has undoubtedly remained a market leader. Its devices sell in tens of millions. Its ecosystem is still among the strongest in the world, yet the emotional component has faded. iPhones are released every year. Differences between generations are minimal. Presentations have become predictable, and the wow effect that once kept people awake all night before launch days has nearly disappeared. Apple has turned into a perfect, polished assembly line that produces the best versions of yesterday's ideas, but creates almost no truly new ones. And inside the company, this is well understood. That is why, over the last 2 years, Apple has been actively searching for a breaking point, a technology or concept that would allow it once again to dictate the future rather than chase it. Liquid glass fits perfectly into this strategy because it is not just a redesign, but an interface that assumes interaction with depth, light, transparency, and the real surrounding space. Such an interface is meaningless without hardware capable of unlocking its potential. And this is where the idea of a transparent iPad emerges. A device that stops being just a screen and becomes a window between the digital and physical worlds. According to insider reports, Apple has been experimenting for years with multi-layer glass panels, new types of OLED and micro-LED displays with variable transparency, as well as composite materials that can retain strength even with a high degree of transparency. This is not about a fully glass device that is completely see-through like in science fiction films, but about controlled transparency, where the interface literally floats in space and content can be overlaid onto the real world behind the device. Such an iPad could become an intermediate link between traditional tablets and Apple's future spatial devices, including Vision and subsequent AR products. Imagine a tablet that, when turned off, looks like a thin sheet of glass, and when turned on, the liquid glass interface literally materializes out of the air. Layers of information emerge, reflect, refract, and applications are perceived not as flat windows, but as volumetric objects. For designers, architects, engineers, developers, artists, and even ordinary users, this could become a new standard for interacting with information. And it is precisely the iPad, not the iPhone, that makes the most sense as the first such device. The tablet has always been Apple's experimental platform, where the company has allowed itself far more freedom. It was precisely the iPad that became the first device where Apple began to erase the boundaries between mobile and desktop computing. The iPad was the first to receive support for Apple Pencil, multitasking, professional applications, and new interface formats. A transparent iPad could become that very testing ground where Apple refines technologies, design, and user scenarios before taking the risk of bringing this to the iPhone. According to insider information, there are several closed prototypes inside Apple with a high proportion of transparent elements, and liquid glass was developed in parallel specifically for such form factors. This explains why the new interface works so actively with depth, reflections, light, and layers. It is literally designed for glass rather than just for a screen. If such an iPad is successfully accepted by the market, Apple will be able to launch an entire line of transparent devices, including in the future, the first transparent iPhone, which would become the company's loudest product since the original iPhone of 2007. And here, it is important to understand that Apple is now at a point where it critically needs to reclaim its status as a company that shows the future. Competitors are catching up and overtaking it in individual characteristics. Chinese brands are experimenting with form factors, foldable screens, transparent displays, and Apple risks ending up in the role of a follower if it does not take a radical step. A transparent device is a risk, but it is exactly the kind of risk that matches Apple's DNA. In the past, the company has already taken similar gambles, abandoning floppy disks, ports, buttons, and connectors, and each time the market initially resisted and then accepted the new standards as a given. A transparent iPad may face the same problems: high price, questions of durability, repairability, and battery life. But if Apple manages to solve these challenges, it will not simply release a new device, it will set a direction for an entire decade. Moreover, transparent devices fit perfectly into Apple's strategy of bringing the physical and digital worlds closer together. Vision Pro showed that Apple sees the future not in screens but in spaces, not in windows, but in environments. A transparent iPad could become a bridge between familiar screens and full-fledged spatial reality. A device that does not frighten users with radical change, but gradually accustoms them to a new way of interacting with information. And if this experiment turns out to be successful, Apple may truly regain global leadership in innovation, once again becoming a company that people watch not because of another incremental performance increase, but because it changes the very concept of personal devices. Liquid glass in this context looks not like a final product, but like the first layer, the first crack in the familiar paradigm of screens. Perhaps in the coming years we will see not just a new iPad, but the beginning of the era of transparent Apple electronics, where devices will cease to be black rectangles and will become part of the surrounding world. And then it will become clear that that very liquid glass announcement was not about beauty, but about a future that Apple has begun building right now. If you look at the situation more broadly, it becomes clear that for Apple, transparency is not an effect and not a wow factor, but a tool for controlling user attention. When a device stops being a solid opaque surface, the very logic of interaction changes. The user no longer falls into the screen, but works with information while remaining in the context of the real world. This is a fundamentally different approach, and it requires not only new hardware, but also a new interface psychology, precisely the one Apple is beginning to shape through liquid glass. Such an iPad could change the very role of the tablet in everyday life. It ceases to be a device for content consumption and becomes a tool for observation, overlay, and analysis. Architectural plans over real space, educational materials layered onto the surrounding environment, work interfaces that do not block the world but complement it. This is not augmented reality in the usual sense, but a softer, evolutionary form of it, without headsets, without isolation, without a sense of artificiality. At the same time, Apple gains a unique advantage. It can introduce such scenarios gradually without breaking the habits of millions of users. Transparency becomes not mandatory, but adaptive. In some scenarios, the iPad behaves like a familiar tablet. In others, like a glass mediator between a person and the environment. This approach perfectly matches Apple's philosophy, where technology should disappear rather than dominate. It is also important that such a step changes the economics of the ecosystem. A class of applications emerges that cannot be realized on conventional screens. Interfaces tied to depth, real lighting, and physical surroundings. This means a new market for developers, new professional tools, and ultimately a new growth point for Apple itself, which is finding it increasingly difficult to scale within familiar form factors. And it is precisely here that the transparent iPad stops being an experiment for the sake of experiment. It becomes a transitional device, the very bridge that connects the flat world of screens with spatial computing. Not a radical leap, but a careful, almost imperceptible shift of reality. The user gets used to the idea that the interface can exist not in front of them, but within space. And at some point, this stops feeling unusual. If Apple truly goes down this path, then in a few years, we will remember liquid glass not as a redesign, but as the beginning of a slow abandonment of the very concept of the screen. And then the question will sound differently. Not why Apple made a transparent iPad, but why we believed for so long that devices had to be opaque. In recent months, tension has been growing within the global technology industry, increasingly compared not to another race for megapixels or raw performance, but to the beginning of a fundamentally new era of personal devices. According to multiple industry sources, the Chinese company Huawei is preparing to take a step that could overturn the tablet market and call into question the long-standing dominance of giants such as Apple and Samsung. This is not merely about a new flagship or another design iteration, but about an attempt to radically change the very idea of how a personal gadget should look and feel in the 21st century. According to people familiar with the company's internal developments, Huawei is secretly working on fully transparent device technology and may soon unveil the world's first fully functional prototype of a transparent tablet capable of operating in everyday use, rather than as a laboratory concept. If this information is confirmed, the market will be on the verge of its most serious shift since the launch of the first iPad, when tablets suddenly transformed from a niche product into a mass phenomenon. Sources close to Asian supply chains claim that inside Huawei, this project is seen as a strategic response not only to Apple, but to the entire Western technology world. After sanctions, trade restrictions, and effective isolation from US technologies, the company was forced to rebuild nearly its entire ecosystem, from processors and software to displays and production lines. And it is precisely within this forced isolation, analysts argue, that Huawei gained a rare advantage: the freedom to experiment without being constrained by established market standards. While Apple and Samsung cautiously refine existing form factors, wary of risks to sales, Huawei, according to insiders, is ready to go all in and present a device that looks as if it came straight out of science fiction. According to leaks, This is not about a partially transparent casing or decorative elements, but about a fundamentally new type of display in which most of the surface remains transparent even in an active state. The technology reportedly combines an advanced transparent OLED panel, quantum dot microlayers, and adaptive backlighting that reveals the image only where needed. As a result, the interface appears to float in mid-air, and the user sees not just a screen but digital information overlaid onto the real world. Some sources compare the effect to augmented reality, but without glasses or headsets, with the device itself becoming a window between physical and digital space. Of particular interest is the claim by industry analysts that Huawei has managed to solve one of the main problems of transparent displays, namely low brightness and poor readability in daylight. This limitation is precisely why most transparent screens have so far remained exhibition experiments or have been used only in storefronts and advertising panels. If Huawei has indeed achieved acceptable contrast and energy efficiency, this would represent a technological breakthrough that automatically puts the company several years ahead of its competitors. Comparisons are already being drawn within the industry to the moment when Apple first unveiled a touch interface without physical buttons, when the market also did not immediately realize that the rules of the game had changed forever. Authoritative Asian publications, citing anonymous sources in Chinese research centers, claim that Huawei views the transparent tablet not as a niche product for enthusiasts, but as the foundation of a new ecosystem. Such a tablet could become a universal device for work, education, design, and smart home control, envisioning a desk with no physical screen, only a glass panel through which the surface of the desk remains visible, while windows, documents, 3D models, and interfaces are projected on top of it. For designers and engineers, this means a new level of interaction with content, while for everyday users, it creates the feeling that technology has finally stopped being bulky and intrusive. Against the backdrop of these rumors, noticeable concern is reportedly growing in Cupertino and Seoul. Apple has traditionally been cautious about radical form factor experiments, preferring to refine technologies to near perfection before mass adoption. Samsung, for its part, has been actively experimenting with flexible and foldable displays, but transparent devices have so far remained more a demonstration of capabilities than a real product for the company. If Huawei does indeed present a working prototype ahead of everyone else, this could force competitors to accelerate their programs and take risks they were not prepared for. The broader context makes the situation even more tense. The world has been living for several years in conditions of technological confrontation between the US and China, where every new development is perceived not only as a commercial product, but also as an element of strategic influence. In this sense, a transparent tablet from Huawei could become a symbol that China is capable not only of catching up, but of setting the direction for the development of consumer technologies. Some analysts state outright that if Huawei is the first to bring such a device to market, it would not simply be a victory for one company, but a serious blow to the myth of unconditional leadership by Western technology corporations. According to insiders, Huawei is fully aware of the risks. The project was allegedly several times on the verge of cancellation due to manufacturing complexity and the high cost of components. However, in recent months the situation has changed. Chinese display and materials suppliers, having received state support, were able to establish production of key elements, which sharply increased the chances of a real announcement. Moreover, some sources claim that the company has already demonstrated prototypes to a narrow circle of partners and officials, and the initial feedback was so positive that the project received a green light for further development. Looking more broadly, the emergence of transparent gadgets could change not only device design, but our relationship with technology as a whole. Today, screens dominate our space, separating us from the surrounding world. Transparent devices, by contrast, promise to make technology less intrusive, more natural, and more seamlessly integrated into everyday life. This opens the door to entirely new usage scenarios, from education and medicine to architecture and urban planning. And if Huawei truly becomes the first company to take this step, its name may be forever written into the history of the industry. The question now is not whether such a technology is possible in principle, but who will dare to take the first mass-market step. According to a number of experts, Huawei today occupies a unique position. The company has already gone through a crisis, lost a great deal, and is therefore ready to take risks where others would prefer caution. And if in the coming months we do indeed see the announcement of the first fully functional transparent tablet, this could be the very moment when the personal gadget industry finally turns away from its familiar path and enters a new, still frighteningly unknown era. That is why behind the scenes of the industry, an idea is increasingly voiced that if Huawei manages to realize this vision, the company will effectively impose a new standard on the market, while all other players will be forced to chase, justify themselves, and explain to investors why they once again found themselves a step behind. And perhaps the most unsettling thing for competitors is that Huawei, judging by the leaks, is no longer trying to appeal to everyone. The company is ready to release a product that will provoke controversy, skepticism, and even mockery. But it is precisely such products that ultimately change the world. If this scenario plays out, in a few years, we may look back and realize that this announcement marked the beginning of the end of the familiar era of screens, bodies, and frames, an era in which technology was visible, and the beginning of a new one, where it becomes transparent. In recent days, the tech news space has seen a sharp increase in leaks and insider reports suggesting that Apple's next major step in the evolution of the iPhone may come as early as 2026, and that this step will be the first foldable iPhone. Importantly, this is not about a single random rumor or isolated publication, but about a whole wave of information coming simultaneously from multiple directions. Display market analysts, sources in Asian supply chains, technology media, and insiders who have previously confirmed their forecasts. All of this creates the sense that the foldable iPhone project has truly reached the stage where its existence can no longer be fully concealed. Discussions around a foldable form factor at Apple have been ongoing for nearly a decade, and throughout this time, the company has remained deliberately silent, watching as the market experimented without it. Over these years, foldable smartphones have evolved from concepts into mass-produced devices, yet they still have not become a mainstream standard. Competitor models have proven that the idea works, but they have also exposed key problems: a noticeable crease on the display, concerns about hinge durability, device thickness, and the feeling that the user constantly has to accept compromises for the sake of the form factor itself. This is precisely where Apple's logic begins. Historically, the company does not enter new categories first, but at the moment when it can radically improve the user experience and set a new quality benchmark. According to current leaks, inside Apple, the foldable iPhone has long since stopped being a laboratory experiment. Reports say that fully functional engineering prototypes exist and are undergoing testing not only within the company, but also among supply chain partners. At the same time, Apple has reportedly been exploring several formats in parallel, including a vertical flip-style design, but the primary focus is increasingly shifting toward a book-style form factor. This approach appears logical. When unfolded, the device becomes a compact tablet, and when folded, it remains a full-fledged smartphone, fitting perfectly into the strategy of bringing the iPhone and iPad closer together. The key reason Apple has waited so long to enter the foldable market is reliability. Unlike Android manufacturers who can release a product and refine it during its life cycle, Apple is unwilling to risk its reputation. According to insiders, the company has postponed internal development timelines several times, specifically because of display and folding mechanism issues. The main goal is to achieve a crease depth so minimal that it is virtually invisible during normal use. To accomplish this, Apple is reportedly developing its own stress distribution methods for the flexible panel and experimenting with new materials that better withstand prolonged mechanical strain. Special attention is being given to the hinge, not as a secondary component, but as a key part of the user experience. Leaks mention a complex multi-segment design intended to evenly distribute load across the entire fold line and prevent accelerated wear in the central zone. This is critical because the hinge remains the weak point of most foldable smartphones on the market. Apple, judging by the reports, wants the foldable iPhone to feel not like an exotic device, but like a regular iPhone that simply happens to change shape. As for size, Insiders generally agree that the unfolded display diagonal will be in the range of about 7.5 to 8 inches, roughly at the level of the iPad mini. At the same time, Apple is reportedly aiming to make the device thinner than competitors in its folded state, so that the user does not feel as if they are carrying two phones stacked together in their pocket. To achieve this, the company is experimenting with segmented battery architecture, internal component layout, and a magnetic flap locking system so that the device feels solid and monolithic when closed. The software side appears no less important than the hardware. The foldable iPhone, according to rumors, will not simply be a regular iPhone with a stretched interface. Apple views it as a hybrid device capable of dynamically changing usage scenarios. In its folded state, it functions as a classic smartphone, while when unfolded, it becomes a space for multitasking, working with content, and even professional applications. This approach is directly connected to Apple's broader strategy of bringing iOS, iPadOS, and visionOS closer together, where devices stop being isolated and begin operating as a single computational system. For the foldable smartphone market, Apple's entry could become a turning point. Despite the active efforts of Samsung and other manufacturers, the segment still remains niche and accounts for only a few % of global sales. The main problem is the lack of a universal quality standard that could convince the mass user. This is exactly where Apple is traditionally strong. If the foldable iPhone really launches in 2026, it may sharply expand the audience for this form factor because Apple's ecosystem, user loyalty, and the rapid adaptation of applications by developers can turn a niche product into a new mainstream. For Apple itself, the foldable iPhone looks like a strategic step against the backdrop of slowing growth in the classic smartphone market. It is not just a response to competitors or an attempt to catch up with Samsung, but the creation of a new growth driver that expands iPhone usage scenarios and prepares users for future form factors. The foldable iPhone becomes an intermediate link between smartphones, tablets, and AR devices, opening the way to more flexible and adaptive devices that will change shape and functionality according to the task, rather than being limited by a rigid body. A separate layer of discussion on the internet concerns what the appearance of a foldable iPhone will mean for competitors. For Samsung, which has effectively created the mass market for fold devices, this will become the most serious challenge in recent years. Bloggers and analysts openly write that Apple's launch may wipe out Samsung's current advantage in the perception of foldable smartphones, because Apple is capable of setting a new standard of quality and user experience. As a result, pressure will also intensify on other manufacturers, Huawei, Motorola, Google, and Chinese brands, which will have to not just release new models, but reconsider their entire approach to design, thickness, durability, and software. Many tech bloggers call the future foldable iPhone a moment of truth for the entire segment. Either foldable devices will become mainstream, or the market will remain niche. The question of price is generating no less discussion. At the moment, the exact cost of the device is, of course, unknown, and Apple has made no official statements. However, according to some unofficial data and analyst estimates that are actively cited in Western publications and blogs, the foldable iPhone may cost roughly between $2,000 and $2,500 at launch, most often a reference point of about $2,300 to $2,400 is mentioned, which would make it the most expensive iPhone in history. Bloggers emphasize that such a price looks logical given the cost of flexible displays, the complex hinge, and the positioning of the device as a premium hybrid of iPhone and iPad, while many note that Apple's audience is psychologically ready for a high price if the product truly offers a new level of convenience and quality. Taken together, all this indicates that the foldable iPhone is not just another flagship and not an attempt to catch up with competitors. It is a strategic product that may restart the foldable device market, expand its audience, and change the balance of power in the industry. And if the current leaks really reflect reality, then 2026 may go down in history as the moment when Apple once again did what it does best: not create a category first, but rethink it in such a way that the entire industry is forced to rewrite the rules of the game from scratch. In recent months, conversations in Asian tech circles have increasingly focused on the idea that Xiaomi is preparing for the most ambitious and risky step in the company's history, a step that insiders have already begun calling a leap beyond the smartphone era. According to several sources, including analysts from Nikkei Asia and South China Morning Post, as well as insiders linked to supply chains in Shenzhen and Taiwan, Xiaomi is secretly developing a fundamentally new device that does not fit into the category of smartphones, smartwatches, or AR glasses. In leaks, the project appears under working names such as Xiaomi HyperVision, Xiaomi Mi Vision X, or simply X device, which matches the company's tradition of testing several names before the final release. People familiar with Xiaomi's internal presentations say the company plans to introduce this device in 2026, positioning it not as another gadget, but as the central node of a next-generation personal digital ecosystem capable of replacing several devices at once. Unlike Apple, which moves cautiously and selectively, Xiaomi is betting on aggressive technological expansion, aiming to be the first to bring to the mass market what competitors still show only as concepts. According to leaks, Xiaomi HyperVision is a wearable device with a distributed architecture in which the computing unit, sensors, and interface are split across several elements, including a compact module worn on the body and a spatial projection system that creates a virtual screen in the air or on surrounding surfaces. Control is performed through gestures, eye tracking, voice, and AI deeply integrated into the proprietary HyperOS ecosystem, which plays a key role in this project. Analysts believe Xiaomi is deliberately building HyperVision as a logical extension of HyperOS, transforming the operating system from a smartphone shell into a universal platform for human interaction with the digital world. According to insiders from Xiaomi Labs, the company is betting on its own AI models optimized to run on-device without constant cloud connectivity, reducing latency and improving autonomy while maintaining a price advantage. Experts from Counterpoint Research argue that price may become Xiaomi's main weapon in this race, since if Apple launches its device in the premium segment, Xiaomi could offer a similar concept at half the cost, making it mainstream. Supply chain sources claim Xiaomi has already ordered large batches of micro OLED and waveguide components from Chinese and Korean manufacturers, including BOE and Tianma, and is actively investing in startups working on optical projection and spatial interfaces, which supports the view that HyperVision is not an experiment but a long-term strategic product. It is important to note that unlike Apple, Xiaomi is not afraid to release products at an early stage of technological maturity, preferring to refine them together with the market. And this is why the company may dare to unveil HyperVision earlier than competitors, even if the first versions are imperfect. According to Chinese media, within Xiaomi, the project is seen as a chance to step out of the shadow of Apple and Samsung and secure the role of a company that sets trends rather than chases leaders. Analysts point out that Xiaomi has repeatedly demonstrated the ability to scale complex technologies, whether in electric vehicles, smart home systems, or wearable electronics, and HyperVision may become the culmination of this strategy. The uniqueness of the device, insiders say, lies in the fact that it does not require a constant screen. The smartphone becomes only a supporting node, and the main interaction takes place through projection and contextual AI that analyzes the user's environment, habits, and tasks in real time. This means that HyperVision may become the first truly mass post-smartphone device aimed not at enthusiasts, but at a wide audience. And according to IDC analysts, if Xiaomi manages to implement this scenario, the market may face a serious redistribution of power in which the Chinese manufacturer for the first time directly challenges Apple not in the smartphone category, but in shaping the future of user interfaces. At the same time, it is important that Xiaomi is actively leveraging the current geopolitical situation by betting on China's technological autonomy, its own chips, AI models, and ecosystem, which reduces dependence on American technologies and sanction risks, making HyperVision not only a commercial product, but also a strategic element of Chinese technological independence. According to insiders, the company is discussing a scenario in which by the end of the decade, the smartphone will no longer be Xiaomi's main source of revenue, giving way to wearable devices and services built around AI and spatial interfaces. And if these plans are realized, 2026 may go down in history as the moment when Xiaomi became the first to step into the post-smartphone era, turning experimental technologies into a mass product and imposing on the market a new logic of human interaction with digital reality where the screen no longer limits but disappears, giving way to space, intelligence, and speed. It is especially telling that in recent months, Xiaomi has noticeably changed the rhetoric of its public speeches and presentations, increasingly moving away from the usual emphasis on best value for money toward conversations about the future of human-technology interaction, something previously more typical of Apple than Chinese manufacturers. According to sources in Chinese venture funds, Xiaomi is already testing early prototypes of the device in closed groups, including employees of ecosystem companies and HyperOS developers. And the first impressions, despite the immaturity of the technologies, are described as a feeling of stepping into a future the market is not yet ready for. And experts believe that if Xiaomi succeeds in bringing Hypervision to a stable consumer level, the company may not only create a new product, but change the very dynamics of the global market, where for the first time in many years, a Chinese brand will set the direction of development, while Western corporations are forced to react and catch up. And in this context, 2026 is increasingly being called a turning point, the moment after which the smartphone will finally cease to be the sole center of digital life, and Xiaomi will gain a chance to secure its place in history, not as a manufacturer of affordable gadgets, but as the company that first turned the post-smartphone concept into a mass reality, permanently changing the balance of power in the global technology industry. Additional attention from analysts is also drawn to the fact that as part of preparing Hypervision, Xiaomi has begun to revise its strategy for working with developers, gradually shifting key HyperOS tools into a format oriented not towards screens, but towards spatial and contextual interfaces, which is confirmed by leaks of internal SDKs and experimental APIs. According to sources close to the development process, the company is already testing new monetization principles in which the user pays not for applications in the usual sense, but for functions, scenarios, and intelligent services operating on top of the real world. And this may become a long-term source of revenue, comparable in scale to the current smartphone market. Experts emphasize that such an approach is capable of sharply transforming the Android ecosystem and increasing pressure both on Google and on manufacturers of classic smartphones, since Xiaomi is effectively proposing an alternative model of digital interaction in which the screen ceases to be a mandatory intermediary between humans and technology. In recent months, increasingly alarming yet intriguing signals have been emerging within the global technology industry, pointing more and more clearly to the fact that Samsung is preparing the most ambitious update of its product lineup in the entire history of the brand. And according to several sources close to the leadership of the South Korean giant, the first public announcements of this new strategy are preliminarily scheduled for 2026. And this is not about cosmetic improvements or another iteration of familiar devices, but about a fundamental rethinking of what user experience can be in the post-smartphone era, as classic form factors rapidly lose relevance and the market increasingly shows signs of innovation stagnation. According to insiders cited by authoritative outlets such as Bloomberg, Nikkei Asia, and the Korean publication The Elec, Samsung has spent the last 2 years conducting an internal restructuring of its research divisions, unifying display, mobile device, and artificial intelligence teams into a single ecosystem aimed at creating a technological leap comparable in scale to the transition from button phones to touchscreens. Sources claim that the phrase window of opportunity is being used more and more frequently inside the company, and this window is directly linked to the fact that Apple, despite its dominance, is increasingly criticized for a lack of radical innovation, while other tech giants are either stuck in niche products or unwilling to risk the mass market. It is precisely at this moment that Samsung, according to insiders, decided to bet on a direction that until recently was considered too futuristic and impractical for the mass consumer: transparent technologies. Inside the company, this direction is described not merely as experimental, but as strategic, and it has long ceased to be an abstract concept. Samsung has been investing for many years in the development of transparent displays, starting with commercial solutions for storefronts, museums, and advertising panels, continuing with experiments in transparent OLED and micro-LED showcased at CES and IFA but kept out of the mass market. Samsung Display is now considered one of the global leaders in transparent screen manufacturing, and sources claim that as early as 2024, the company reached a key technological threshold at which transparency stopped being purely demonstrative and began to combine with acceptable brightness, contrast, and energy efficiency. Against this backdrop, the active integration of artificial intelligence into the device design process became the catalyst that allowed Samsung to move from "we can show a prototype" to "we can build a product." According to Korean sources, AI is used not only for image optimization and adaptive interfaces, but also for engineering tasks, component distribution, management of transparent layers, compensation for optical distortions, and even dynamic dimming of specific screen zones depending on content and lighting. Inside the company, this is referred to as smart transparency, where a device remains visually transparent but can turn into a fully dense screen when needed. It is this technology, insiders say, that will form the basis of a new lineup of devices Samsung plans to introduce starting in 2026. This includes an entire family of products: a transparent smartphone, a transparent tablet, next-generation transparent TVs, and even smart home elements integrated into glass surfaces. However, the key and most important product of this lineup, according to sources, will be the world's first commercially oriented transparent tablet, unofficially referred to inside the company as the iPad killer. According to leak reports, the tablet was chosen as the starting device for a reason. The tablet form factor allows batteries and computing modules to be placed in opaque areas of the frame or in thickened sections, while preserving the effect of an almost fully transparent working space, something that is far more difficult to achieve in a smartphone. Sources familiar with the prototypes claim that the Samsung tablet will use a hybrid architecture, a transparent OLED layer, combined with an active micro-LED backlight matrix controlled by AI in real time. This would allow the device to be nearly invisible when turned off and transform into a vivid display when activated, with support for partial transparency for augmented reality workflows, blueprints, next-generation interfaces, and professional applications. According to analysts cited by Financial Times journalists, this is where the potential revolution lies. While Apple continues to position the iPad as essentially a large iPhone, Samsung may offer a fundamentally different usage model in which the tablet ceases to be just a screen and becomes part of the surrounding space. Insiders say the device will be deeply integrated with Samsung's AI ecosystem, including a next-generation personal assistant capable of adapting the interface to context, from work and education to entertainment and design. Screen transparency, according to sources, unlocks entirely new scenarios. Architects will be able to overlay digital plans onto real objects. Designers will work with 3D models directly in physical space, and everyday users will use the tablet as a window into the digital layer of reality. This, according to insiders, may be precisely why Apple could find itself in a catching-up position. Within the industry, there is growing sentiment that Apple is too tightly bound to existing product categories and fears radically changing form factors due to the risk of cannibalizing its own devices. Samsung, by contrast, has historically been more willing to take risks by releasing experimental products, as seen with foldable smartphones, which were initially met with skepticism but ultimately set a new trend for the entire market. Insiders say that if Samsung's transparent tablet is unveiled in 2026 and proves even partially ready for mass adoption, Apple could fall several years behind, since such technologies require long development cycles and major supply chain restructuring. Moreover, sources claim Samsung is already in talks with key software developers, offering them early access to SDKs for transparent interfaces, potentially creating a snowball effect even before an official announcement. Behind the scenes at technology conferences, there is increasing talk that 2026 could become a turning point for the entire personal device industry, with transparent technologies emerging as the long-discussed next big step that no one previously dared to take first. If these insider reports are confirmed even partially, Samsung may indeed seize the initiative from Apple by offering the market not just another tablet, but a new vision of how humans interact with the digital world, where the boundary between the screen and reality begins to dissolve. And this is why, according to analysts, the next 2 years will be decisive. Either Apple manages to respond to this challenge, or for the first time in a long while finds itself in the position of having to catch up with a competitor that dared to step into the future ahead of everyone else. Against this backdrop, it is especially telling that within Apple itself, according to sources close to the Asian supply chain, transparent displays are still viewed more as a long-term experiment than as a priority product. And this, according to analysts at Morgan Stanley and Bernstein Research, could play a decisive role in shifting the balance of power in the market. While Apple remains focused on refining existing form factors and the gradual evolution of its ecosystem, Samsung, judging by insider leaks, is betting on the element of surprise and a technological shock capable of reshaping user expectations. Sources claim that within Samsung there is serious consideration of a scenario in which a transparent tablet becomes not just a standalone product, but a symbol of a new era for the brand. A kind of manifesto demonstrating that the company is once again ready to set the rules of the game. Moreover, according to Korean media reports, a limited launch in key regions, South Korea, the US, and Japan, is being discussed, with subsequent scaling if the market response proves positive. This approach allows risks to be minimized, while simultaneously creating an aura of exclusivity around the device, which could play a role no less important than the technology itself. Within the industry, there is growing talk that if Samsung manages to prove the viability of transparent devices as early as 2026, it could trigger a chain reaction, forcing competitors to urgently revise their roadmaps. And then the question will no longer be whether the market is ready for transparent technologies, but who was first to turn a futuristic idea into a real product, and who will ultimately be left behind, clinging to familiar but aging form factors. In recent months, cautious but persistent signals have been increasingly heard within the technology industry that Apple is standing on the threshold of the most radical step in its entire history, a step that could permanently change the understanding of personal devices. According to information from several independent sources at once, including Bloomberg analysts, former Apple engineers, and component suppliers in Asia, the company is preparing to present in 2026 an absolutely new type of device. Not a smartphone, not a tablet, and not a headset in the conventional sense, but something that inside Apple itself is increasingly referred to as a post-iPhone device, a device of the era after the smartphone. In various leaks, it appears under working names such as Apple Airvision, Apple Vision One, or simply Vision without any suffixes, which in itself is highly uncharacteristic for the company and points to the special status of the project. According to people familiar with internal discussions in Cupertino, Apple is deliberately moving away from the logic of yet another gadget and instead is creating a new fundamental interface for human interaction with the digital world, a device that effectively has no direct analogs on the market because competitors still think in terms of screens, bodies, and diagonals, while Apple is betting on the disappearance of the screen as a physical object. We are talking about a hybrid wearable device that combines elements of a spatial computer, a personal AI assistant, and wearable electronics, but without a bulky headset and without the need to constantly hold something in the hands. According to insiders, Apple Airvision is an ultra-thin device integrated into the Apple Watch and Vision Pro ecosystem, capable of projecting an interface directly into the user's field of view using next-generation micro-optical systems, with control carried out through gestures, gaze, voice, and contextual AI that anticipates the user's actions before the user consciously realizes them. This, according to Financial Times analysts, is where the main revolution lies. Apple no longer offers the user to look at a screen. Apple offers interaction with reality, augmented by a digital layer that appears only when it is truly needed. Sources in the supply chain claim that the key technology behind Airvision will be a new micro-OLED and waveguide optics architecture being developed by Apple together with TSMC and several highly secretive Silicon Valley startups. And this is not about technologies available to the market today, but about solutions that competitors will be able to replicate at best in 5 to 7 years. That is why inside Apple there is confidence that the device will have no direct analog, just as the iPhone once had none at the moment of its launch, despite the existence of smartphones from Nokia, BlackBerry, and Palm. It is important to understand that Apple is not simply creating new hardware, it is rebuilding the entire logic of interaction with the digital environment, and artificial intelligence plays a key role here. According to the information, as part of the Airvision project, Apple is creating its own next-generation AI platform that will be deeply integrated into the device and operate locally without constant data transmission to the cloud, which will allow the company to preserve its signature focus on privacy and security. This AI will not simply respond to queries, it will become an intermediary between the human and the digital world, filtering notifications, content, and information so that the user receives only what is truly important at a specific moment in time. Morgan Stanley analysts note that this is precisely what could strike at the current smartphone model, which today overwhelms users with screens, notifications, and constant demands for attention, turning the device into a source of stress, whereas Apple Airvision is positioned as a technology that frees attention. According to one former Apple top executive who asked to remain anonymous, inside the company this project is perceived not as another product line, but as a change of era, and that is precisely why Apple is willing to wait until 2026, refining the technology to a level that meets its standards, instead of rushing and releasing an unfinished solution as competitors often do. Particular attention should be paid to the fact that Apple is deliberately not following the path of foldable smartphones, wrist devices, and rollable displays, despite active experimentation by Samsung and Chinese manufacturers in this area. In the view of Apple engineers, flexible displays remain a compromise solution that merely extends the life of the smartphone concept without solving the fundamental problem of screen dependency. In contrast, Airvision does not require a constant physical display at all. The screen appears only when it is needed and disappears when it is not, which radically changes the user experience. This is why Bloomberg intelligence analysts call this project potentially the most dangerous for the consumer electronics market in the last 20 years, as it threatens not only Samsung and Android manufacturers, but the entire ecosystem of applications built around smartphones. If Apple succeeds, developers will have to rethink interfaces, UX, and the very principles of interaction with users, which would mean a large-scale shift across the entire industry. An important signal is also that in recent years, Apple has been actively acquiring startups in the fields of neural interfaces, eye tracking, gesture control, and contextual AI, with many of these deals not being publicly disclosed. According to Nikkei Asia, Apple is also investing significant funds in new types of batteries and energy-efficient chips. Since Airvision's battery life is considered a critically important factor, the device must operate all day without recharging, without heating up, and without being felt on the body. All of this indicates that Apple is preparing not just a product, but a foundation for the next decade, an ecosystem in which the iPhone will gradually move to the background, remaining only one element rather than the central device. Inside Apple itself, according to sources, a scenario is already being discussed in which iPhone sales begin to gradually decline after 2027, but the company is consciously taking this risk, understanding that if it does not disrupt its own product, competitors will do it instead. This is precisely the philosophy of Apple once articulated by Steve Jobs. It is better to cannibalize yourself than to allow others to do it. If the leaks are confirmed and Apple indeed presents Airvision in 2026, the market may face the largest technological shift since the emergence of smartphones, and then the question will not be whether everyone likes this device, but how quickly the world adapts to a reality in which the phone is no longer the center of a person's digital life. Moreover, sources in Cupertino claim that inside the company, a scenario is being considered in which Airvision eventually becomes a mandatory hub of the Apple ecosystem, through which all key services will pass, from Apple Pay and iMessage to future AI features and spatial media, while the iPhone gradually turns into a secondary device, similar to how the Mac today is a tool for work rather than an everyday universal gadget. It is precisely this scenario, according to Goldman Sachs analysts, that causes the greatest concern among Apple's competitors, because it implies not just the release of a new product, but the capture of control over the user's attention, time, and life context, which in the digital economy is the most valuable resource. If these assessments are correct, Apple's 2026 presentation may go down in history not as another device launch, but as the moment when the company officially announces the beginning of the end of the smartphone era, offering the world an alternative for which the industry is not yet ready.